Hello, everyone. This is Nayiri from Low Carb and Fasting. Now, a few years ago, a book came out. A book was published by Dr. Ken Berry, and it was called Lies My Doctor Told Me. I was fascinated, obviously, by the titles. I purchased the book as soon as it was published. I read it back to back in the space of a few days. And it exposed me to the lies that dominate our healthcare system. The healthcare industry, maybe, is a better way to call it. And a few weeks ago, when I spotted the title of a new upcoming book, and the title is Lies I Taught in Medical School, written by a professor of medicine, author of over 200 peer-reviewed papers, contributor of several articles and chapters to different publications, I was naturally intrigued. I wanted to find out more, and I wanted to find out what this professor has been teaching his students for decades, which he now realizes were lies. So I'm honored to have him with us today, Dr. Robert Lufkin. Welcome to Low Carb and Fasting.
Oh, thanks, Nayiri. It's such an honor to be on your program. I've enjoyed listening to your podcasts, and the work you're doing is amazing. So it's great to be here.
That means a lot to me. So thank you very much, Dr. Lufkin. Dr. Lufkin, we are going to talk at least about some of those lies which you've been teaching to your students. But before we do that, can you tell our audience a little bit more about your professional background? Where did you study? What did you specialize in? And what did you teach?
Sure, absolutely. And before I do that, if I may, I want to shout out to Dr. Ken Berry, who wrote that amazing book. He's one of my heroes. And the book I'm doing now is hopefully will honor the book he's done, because he's an inspiration and doing great work. And I recommend everyone looking at his video channel and his books. He has a new book coming out as well, too, I think. But my background is, it's interesting. I started out even before medical school. I was raised in a family where my mom was a professional dietitian. So she was a nutritionist, and she worked in hospitals, and was in touch with the best, presumably the optimal teaching for what to eat and what not to eat. So we religiously followed her instructions, and avoided saturated fats. We avoided cholesterol. We switched out high fat foods for low fat foods, which were typically high sugar foods. We switched out butter for margarine, which contained trans fats back then, and then later on seed oils. We used canola oil instead of saturated fat. So we did all those things. And I was, through the process, maybe I grew interested in medicine and how the human body worked, and I eventually went to college and medical school, and just loved the whole thing. In fact, I continued on in the area I focused in after getting my medical degree was in medical imaging or radiology. And the thing I liked about that specialty is that as a radiologist, one has to be able to interact with all different specialists. So when I talk to the neurosurgeon, I have to, discuss brain tumor anatomy and things that I see on the images, or, a neurologist discuss Alzheimer's disease, or with a cardiologist, we talk about the calcifications we see in the coronary arteries and, the heart disease issues. And with an endocrinologist, we talk about the complications of diabetes and those things. So it was a particularly fun specialty, exciting specialty for me, because it combined a diverse knowledge of many different specialties. So instead of like an ophthalmologist will focus very deeply on the eye and even a portion of the eye like the retina. As a radiologist, you have to be a generalist and be able, although you're an expert in imaging, you have to be able to image many different areas, which I enjoyed. I loved doing my residency. I stayed on and did a fellowship in neuroradiology and head and neck radiology. And I liked it so much, I just never left. I joined the faculty immediately at UCLA, where I worked for essentially my entire career, and had a great time and continue to have a great time seeing patients. First of all, as part of my practice, I had a clinical practice where I saw patients, prescribe drugs, that sort of thing, and also interpret their images, which I still do. In addition to the practice of medicine, I also did research. So I did a lot of research, took a lot of money from drug companies and the government, and my lab was funded on the order of millions of dollars for research. So I'm part of the medical establishment, really. But the best part of my job was and is teaching residents and medical students and other doctors. And because as many teachers will appreciate, we often learn more from our students than we impart to them, just by the questions they ask and the whole experience of teaching. So that's where I've been over the last, that's kind of my background in medicine.
So for a professor of your caliber, with a rich career, something must have triggered you to stand back and question the material that you were teaching, or the truthfulness of the material you were teaching your students. Because it's easy as a retired teacher myself, I know we tend to teach the same material over and over again, year after year. We don't have the time to stand back and look at the value or even the truthfulness of the material in your case. What was that moment of revelation for you, if you like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, everything was going well for me. I was doing the teaching, I was doing the clinical practice, and I was doing original research. As you mentioned, as you referenced, I've participated in writing original research papers and peer-reviewed grants and that sort of thing. But for me personally, the point changed when I began developing some chronic diseases. So I got hypertension, high blood pressure, and was prescribed a medicine for that, which is standard practice. I developed abnormal blood lipids, dyslipidemia, which I was prescribed another drug for that. And I developed gout, which is an arthritis, an acute arthritis of the joints, and I was prescribed a medicine for that. And my blood sugar was slightly elevated in what was called the pre-diabetic range, but I was on the course to developing diabetes. Now, knowing what I knew at the time, I thought, well, my father had many of these diseases, and he actually died of a heart attack and stroke, but he was much older than I was. And at the time I began getting these diagnoses, I still had two daughters that weren't even teenagers yet. And I'm thinking, wow, this is hitting home. You know, I want to be around for them. I want to be a parent. And about that same time, I just happened to have a friend who was a science writer who was interested in writing about bad science. And he had it was well known for work he'd done about writing about problems with physics research and Nobel laureates in physics, but he had just switched to the area of nutrition and was starting to write about that. His name's Gary Taubes, and he's written some landmark books on the subject. And he was one of the first authors I started reading, and his work and many other people that have followed him and in the same line raised some questions about what I had been teaching and what I had been taught, and my overall global view of the way disease worked. And I began to investigate it, and gradually came to some conclusions that were different than I'd had for the last few decades of work there.
Well, your personal story is almost the story of every man. mid 40s, 50s, being diagnosed with chronic illnesses, one after the other, and ending up on a number of medications for chronic illnesses, which we now know are preventable. That's the story of every man. Everyone I look around, everyone I see around me is in that same boat. So, and I think what I see wrong in our society is that most people, and you might disagree with me, but most people that at least I come across see it as normal and put it down to age. Well, okay, so hypertension, well, you're in your 40s now, so, it's not unnatural. Gout, well, again, no one really questions what's causing the gout. Arthritis, oh, okay, well, grandma also had arthritis, so it's probably genetic. We tend to normalize ill health and reliance on medication. And I think that makes it very difficult to change, to become a healthier society. What do you think? Any comments on that?
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's very dangerous, the situation we're in now. In the United States, more than half of the adult population is either overweight or obese. So it's almost normal to be overweight. Over half the population has diabetes or prediabetes of the adult population in the United States. Over half the population has fatty liver disease. So these things are becoming so common that, like you say, they're almost being accepted. It's okay to be overweight. Maybe it's not okay, but it's part of life to be that way. And I think that's a mistaken conclusion. And these chronic diseases that we see increasing, in my opinion, are not necessarily the inevitable results of aging, but have other deeper metabolic factors that fortunately we can control with our lifestyle and the choices that we make in our lives. It's not just that, my father had those diseases, so I just wait until I get them and, do it that way. But unlike my father, I at least have the awareness that there are things I can do in my life that I believe, and that I think my patients can do also, that will change their risk for getting these diseases and can actually prevent the diseases and reverse them if they have them, for some of them.
And I think the education we're providing to wider audience through various social media platforms, and the efforts you're putting into educating people, and your upcoming book are all helpful in in creating that big sort of global change. And you did mention of overweight and of numbers of overweight and obese people in the United States, but it is a global phenomenon. It was the same. I mean, I'm from the UK. It's the same in the UK. Now I've been living in Mexico I've been here now 3 months. I see at least 80% of people around me as overweight or obese. So it is a global phenomenon. So all the efforts you're putting out there and the little effort that I'm putting in, spreading the information, the correct information, I think does make a difference, or would like to believe makes some difference.
Yeah, I have to believe that if people are given the knowledge, if they're given the awareness, and they know the choice, that a given choice is going to have a certain impact in their life, that people will not make that choice. Most people won't. I think beforehand, I mean, I was always told, and even my mom, the dietitian, told me to eat the right foods. Eating right is important. But I think our understanding of what is right and what is harmful with diet has changed dramatically. And so it's a matter of educating people that the dietary choices actually do matter and there are significant effects. It's not like sugar's a problem because it's going to make you gain pounds and give you cavities in your teeth. Sugar's a problem because it's going to give you diabetes, type 2 diabetes, at risk for that. It's going to increase your risk for heart attacks, metabolic syndrome. It's going to increase your risk for Alzheimer's disease, fatty liver, arthritis, and certain types of cancer even. I think if people were aware of the dangers of some of these foods, processed foods particularly, like I said, the sugars, the refined carbohydrates, and the refined seed oils. With that knowledge, I think people would make a decision for themselves. And I think that people just aren't aware of how harmful these things are.
You did mention you often talk about metabolic dysfunction. So what is metabolic? How would you define it? Metabolic dysfunction, and what can we do about it?
Great question. I mean, when I went to medical school, and I think for a long time, metabolism, we always thought of metabolism as just the way the body processes food, which is true, but I've come to realize that metabolism is much more than that. It's basically, it's the underlying mechanism that controls almost everything and drives all the major chronic diseases we've talked about. And metabolism is even, in my opinion, the driver of aging. And the drugs that are being discovered, revolutionary drugs in the last decade or two, that are transforming the way we think about longevity and aging, the way these drugs all work is by changing our metabolism, particularly very specific pathways that have to do with nutrient sensing and glucose. And there's one protein called MTOR that senses insulin, it senses growth factors, it senses a number of different things, and it controls metabolism through this. And having mTOR turned on or turned down can have dramatic effects, not only on our longevity, but essentially all of these chronic diseases. And we can influence proteins like mTOR and these other signaling molecules like insulin and growth factors by the lifestyle choices that we make. In fact, the lifestyle choices we make are much more effective than any particular drug in treating these chronic diseases.
Now you mentioned mTOR. It's not part of my question. I wasn't going to talk about mTOR, but I'm fascinated. And I think most people are afraid of, protein and how protein or excess protein might trigger mTOR, which then, would sort of spur growth, which then may lead, and this is what people say, may lead to, cancer and early aging. Can you clarify that for us? Because I know that is not the truth, and I've listened to many sort of specialists out there talking about mTOR, and in fact they also mention fasting and how fasting has an influence on mTOR as well. Can you clarify that for us?
Sure. Yeah, mTOR is very exciting. It's a little confusing though. Let me clarify it. mTOR is this protein that, when it turns on, it turns up anabolism or growth. It's a growth signaling molecule. When we have a lot of food, mTOR is turned on and it tells the body to grow. And growing triggers a couple things. Cell proliferation, which means the cells grow and we get bigger and bigger. If we have a lot of food, we want to proliferate. The other thing it triggers is inflammation. When we have a lot of food coming into our body, it's through ingesting the food, and any food in our body through the GI tract is absorbed into our system. And with that, there's always a risk for foreign material being absorbed. And that's why we need to dial up inflammation when we're eating. So mTOR does cell proliferation, and it turns up inflammation. The other thing it does, the third thing, is when we have a lot of food on hand, it's more food than we can consume typically. So we want to store it and put it into storage. And to do that, we turn on a hormone called insulin, which causes glucose to be stored as fat, causes the body to take up and store fat and glycogen, a small amount, but largely fat. So those are the three things that mTOR really does. It turns up cell proliferation, cell growth, which is great when you have a lot of food. And then it turns up inflammation, because you want to protect your body from all this food coming in case any bad stuff gets in with the food, which is good. It's a healthy response. And then finally, the last thing we mentioned also is we want to turn up the storage mechanisms to store all this extra food for a rainy day. And that's great. The problem people have pointed out with mTOR is that in the past, and I mean the human past, and by the past I mean pre-agricultural humans, more than 12,000 years ago, most experts believe that humans were hunter-gatherers there, and our meals were infrequent, with large periods of fasting between the meal. That would mean that a protein like mTOR is turned on when we have a lot of food, we cell proliferate, we do those three things. And then the rest of the time when we're not eating, we're essentially fasting, there's no food, and mTOR is turned off. When mTOR is turned off, those three things sort of invert. We dial down inflammation. So we turn off inflammation or turn it down because we don't need it anymore. We turn down cell proliferation because we don't have food. We don't want to proliferate cells. And then we don't want to store food either. We don't want to store fat. In fact, we do just the opposite. When mTOR is turned down, we burn fat and we use ketones and this sort of thing that you may have talked about to your audience before. And then finally, one important thing, when mTOR is turned down, we begin to recycle things. We salvage things. It's called autophagy, where if we don't have food coming in, we look around the house and there's an old piece of furniture, we'll use that for something else, and we'll trigger autophagy, which is a good thing. So the problem with modern society is, by the diet we choose and the fact that we always eat frequent meals throughout the day, mTOR is turned on nearly all the time with us, and we're always in cell proliferation mode, fat storage mode, and inflammation mode. And all those three factors can drive all the chronic diseases we've mentioned. So one of the targets of metabolic health is having a more balanced activation of mTOR, turned on sometimes, turned off sometimes. Now, back to your question, I'm sorry for the long answer, but you asked about protein and mTOR. So things that turn on mTOR are specifically things like glucose and insulin. Protein turns on mTOR a smaller amount, because proteins turn on, as you know, insulin a little bit less than glucose, and fats don't really activate things much at all. Most of the dietary strategies, though, that people are talking about to improve metabolic health, in my opinion, the most effective ones are not to change the protein concentration, but rather to play with the other two macronutrients. As you've probably talked with your guests, there are three macronutrients: protein, fat, and carbohydrates. So I think the most effective strategy for improving metabolic health and turning down mTOR is to substitute, increase the fats and decrease the carbohydrates, but keep protein relatively constant. In that effect, you'll be turning down mTOR, but you don't have to worry about the effects of the protein on the mTOR necessarily.
Great explanation. Thank you very much for that. I think it's the first time we're discussing mTOR on my channel, certainly. You did mention prolongevity. Now, that's an area that interests you. When I happened to mention the word in a completely different context, but I had the word in a written text in one of my Facebook groups, I remember a few comments, or they were the most common comments. So what is prolongevity? Is it just living longer? It's not just about, living up to 100, is it? What is prolongevity? Because who wants to live up to 100 if you're going to spend 35 years in a wheelchair and unable to perform your daily needs?
Yeah. Well, I guess the first clarification is when people talk about extending lifespan, it's implied that you're really extending health span, which is the healthy years. Because as you say, if we add another 10 years of our lives in a nursing home, again, no judgment for nursing homes, but or in a severe disability, that is not as appealing as 10 years of life with better health. So it's about extending the healthy years of our lives. I've only recently become interested in longevity, part of it because I'm getting really old, but also because as I studied these chronic diseases that the ones I've mentioned here in the list and the 4 that I happen to get, they all have this basis in metabolic abnormalities, Alzheimer's, cancer, all of these things. And what also became clear that I wasn't aware of before is that the same metabolic factors that we use to decrease our risk of getting these diseases and actually reverse these diseases are the same things that individuals use as longevity strategies to actually delay aging or prolong longevity. And it turns out it's really the same mechanism. And indeed, aging is the strongest risk factor for all chronic diseases. It's even worse than cigarette smoking for lung cancer is age is a bigger risk factor. So something about aging or living a long time drives these chronic diseases. And as it turns out, there's certain metabolic factors that accumulate in people over time that increase our risk for all these metabolic diseases and actually drive aging. And there's a theory of aging that I used to think, and I was taught in medical school, that aging and longevity is sort of like your car wearing out. Everything in the world wears out, right, over time. It just gets old. But I don't think that anymore. And there's a growing revolution in longevity research, even in mainstream research, that longevity is programmed, that cell death is programmed at a certain time. And that's why humans live a certain length of time, but primates live another length of time. And there's great variety in the lifespan of certain species. But even more revolutionary was there's certain genes that people could found in animals and even in mammals that when they changed the genes, their lifespan increased by 30%. Or significantly affected their lifespan. And this is the really exciting area of what's going on with longevity, because if we do these lifestyle things that improve our risk for these chronic diseases, there's very strong evidence that they actually will improve our aging and reduce other phenotypes or signs of aging that we have in our bodies.
Now, another area of interest for you is reversal of chronic illnesses. I mean, the chronic illnesses that you mentioned that you suffered from. have you been able to reverse those? And what did you do to be able to reverse your hypertension and inflammation? And I can't remember the other two. Tell us
Yeah,
about
it was hypertension, it was gout, prediabetes, and dyslipidemia, where abnormal blood lipids. And as your listeners may be aware, that constellation of symptoms, which or diseases, which traditional mainstream medicine considers to be really separate diseases for many parts. There's some overlap. There's growing evidence that these all have a common metabolic basis, and that the things that drive prediabetes also drive gout and also drive these other things. So what I did was, first of all, I was on prescription drugs for all four of those diseases to, quote unquote, control them. What I did was I took a look at, first of all, my diet. I took a look at what I ate, and I was eating a very high processed food diet. I happened to be vegan at the time, but it was sort of junk food vegan. And I made a conscious effort to get rid of processed foods. That's processed carbohydrates, sugars, processed fats, which are seed oils, canola oil, the hateful eight, that people talk about. And also, I don't have celiac disease, which is a gluten intolerance, but I believe that many people are affected by gluten, even at a subclinical level. Gluten is a protein in certain types of grain. And I avoid gluten, but I actually avoid grains altogether. So that's kind of my dietary picture there. That's what I eat. But as you've hinted at, I believe it's equally important not only what you eat, but when you eat. So instead of taking that diet nutrition style and spreading it out over 15 hours a day of nibbling and 6 small snacks, like my mom always told me was the healthiest thing to do, I shrank it eventually down into 1 meal a day. And that's what I do. The rest of the day I drink water or black coffee or something like that, but I have my 1 meal with my family at dinner time. And then for the most part, I don't eat breakfast or don't eat lunch unless there's a social thing that I need to eat a lunch or something like that. But those are the two big changes I did with diet. And then I looked at my sleep, I looked at exercise, I looked at eliminating toxins in my environment. I looked at other things about any deficiencies that I might have, looking at vitamin B levels and various blood markers, and eventually got everything in order, and my blood pressure returned to normal, off the medicines. I don't take anything for the blood lipids anymore. My gout has disappeared. I don't have problems with uric acid anymore. And it's really been, and my prediabetes is also reversed. So it's been game changing for me personally, but also I can see how it can help other people, and I've seen the effect in other people and my patients already.
Well, lifestyle intervention has certainly turned my life around. As a type 1 diabetic of 44 years now, I got it right this time. I always forget and stumble when I'm doing this podcast. Was it 42? Was it 43, 45? It's 44. It's 44 years of type 1 diabetes. I was expected to be suffering from diabetes-related complications, neuropathy, and as a type 1, heavy reliance on insulin also makes me actually prone to developing insulin resistance, which is now called double diabetes. And given that type 2 diabetes is prevalent in my family, it's something I dread because I'm prone to it, probably genetically. So, but your story is so relatable. When I made those lifestyle changes, I noticed the difference straight away. My exercise changed my strength levels, my the shape of my body completely like transformed. I was a vegetarian for 30 years with intermittent veganism, and I was interviewing Dr. Sean Baker just last week. So he was delighted to hear that I've started eating meat now. So introducing meat also changed my health sort of prospects. Lowering my carbs, in fact, eliminating in most cases, made a big difference too. And fasting, intermittent fasting with occasional extended fast. So that's why our network is called Low Carb and Fasting. Let's talk about the benefits of fasting.
Okay, yeah, and I always say when we talk about fasting, because people fast for many different reasons. It can be a religious reason. It can be a getting ready for surgery. People are told NPO, you know, nothing by mouth. But I think for this, we're going to be talking about fasting for the metabolic health benefits. And for that, what are the benefits? The benefits of fasting are in my opinion, are turning down MTOR and all the downstream effects of that. So MTOR, as we talked about, is the abundance molecule or the anabolism growth molecule that signals that. And by turning down MTOR, we tell the body that we don't have a lot of food, so we don't want to store it as fat. We don't want to have cell proliferation. Instead, we have autophagy and getting rid of senescent cells, which seems to be a very important factor with fasting. Beyond a certain point with fasting, usually it's about 12 hours to get rid of the glycogen stores in your body after you're eating. And then after that, then you've switched over to the metabolic benefits. You're in ketosis, your mTOR is turned down. Those are the benefits. The body begins to repair itself. You're in repair mode. The anabolism, getting rid of senescent cells, those are all very, very positive things that we don't see enough of in our modern society.
Mm-hmm. Because we live in a world of food abundance.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So
and one last thing about food. Food in itself, I believe, is pro-inflammatory. Just whether you turn mTOR up or not, like I hinted at before, I think our bodies have evolved to protect us from the food we eat, any toxins that come in with it. So Rhonda Patrick gave a wonderful presentation at the Metabolic Health Summit up in Santa Barbara a couple months ago. I may be online, I believe it is, but she talked about how food in everybody, it's a normal thing, releases foreign proteins into our bloodstream. It's a normal part of eating, but every time we eat, these foreign proteins get released in our bloodstream, and they can act as endotoxins, and they trigger inflammation. And inflammation is our body's response to protect us from these foreign proteins. The problem is, if we're eating all the time, continuously grazing all day long, this inflammation is turned on. And it's recognized that inflammation is a driver of all the chronic diseases that we've mentioned, and it makes all those diseases worse, if not primarily causing them. So that's the other advantage of just not eating food all the time, is that you're not exposing your gut to the permeability of the leaky gut that we all have in some form or another.
So Dr. Lufkin, let's talk about some of the lies, or at least the ones that you can reveal to us before the book comes out, that you found, that you discovered. So which ones did you mention in the book? What have you been teaching your students, which you now know were not the truth?
Yeah, and to be clear, the lie wasn't an intentional lie at the time, but it's something in retrospect that I regret having taught. But the profoundly disturbing thing is that some of these things that I realize are lies are still believed by my colleagues in the healthcare profession as the truth, and some are even still taught in medical schools as the truth. So that's the disturbing part. The book's laid out in about 12 chapters, and each chapter is a specific disease area. There's a chapter on Alzheimer's disease, a chapter on cancer, all the chronic diseases, basically the major chronic diseases that are killing us. And it happens that these diseases are all tied to this foundational metabolic health in one way or another. So examples of the lies. Start off with a simple lie that a calorie is just a calorie. That's one lie. Or a lie, if you want to lose weight, just exercise more and eat less. A lie about diabetes would be that insulin is the best way to treat type 2 diabetes. I don't believe that, although many people, including the American Diabetes Association, still recommend that. And there's some change made with diet, and which is progress, which is good, but still that was a lie that I taught for many years. The Alzheimer's disease lie is that Alzheimer's disease cannot be treated or reversed. Even the Alzheimer's Association, the leading medical association around Alzheimer's disease, states on their website that, and I actually agree with this part, that there is no pharmacological treatment for Alzheimer's disease that will either significantly slow it down or make any real effect on the outcome. And that's a huge failure for all of us as a society, because all the other diseases at least have some sort of treatment. It may be the wrong treatment, but Alzheimer's disease doesn't even have a treatment. But there's good evidence, as I'll talk about in the book, that there are things that we can do that will lower our chance of getting Alzheimer's disease. And actually, we have controlled clinical trials that some of the phenotypes of Alzheimer's disease can be reversed with some of these aggressive metabolic lifestyle changes as well.
I'm sure you have a chapter in your book on cardiovascular health.
Yes, we do. As the number one killer worldwide, cardiovascular health is a big part of that. There are a couple lies about that. One is that consuming foods high in cholesterol and high in saturated fat raises your risk for heart disease or gives you heart disease. I believe that is a lie. And also another lie around that I talk about in the book is that statins are an effective and worthwhile treatment for heart disease and stroke. And we'll go into some evidence why. I'm not disputing that statins work. I'm just, I'm saying they work at a very small rate, much smaller than it's advertised. And they work for mechanisms that are probably unrelated to lowering LDL cholesterol, probably more related to decreasing inflammation. And the side effects have been greatly underestimated through a number of techniques that we talk about in the book that drug companies use around that as well. So a lot of controversy.
I know that at least for statins, or most of the data comes from the pharmaceutical company that produces statins. I may be incorrect in that, but the data that we have comes from them. So it's difficult to just think of it as unbiased or unmanipulated in some way.
That's absolutely true. One of the most successful drug dealers in history was Pablo Escobar in Colombia, selling cocaine as his empire. But the amount of money he made doesn't hold a candle to the $1 trillion drug industry that is based around statins. And that only works if people believe that LDL cholesterol causes heart disease. And by lowering LDL cholesterol, you lower your risk for heart disease. And the amount of money that flows into patient education, flows into the American Heart Association, flows into even, frankly, misleading ads that we go into detail in the book about, where there's statistical alchemy used to change the reporting methods that report a 36% decreased risk of heart attacks instead of a 1% decreased risk by using the relative risk instead of the absolute risk, and also, yeah, lots of things to cover on the cardiovascular disease part, for sure.
Now that we mentioned the sort of the pharmaceutical sort of industry, how much of a role do they play in the current dogma?
A huge role. And again, I don't want to come off sounding like a conspiracy theorist, because I'm not. I'm literally, I am the medical establishment. I'm at USC medical school now, but I used to be at UCLA, one of the two medical schools, essentially my entire career. I've, done the research, I've worked with drug companies and everything like that. But I do realize that there is a problem with influence when there's huge amounts of money at stake, and whether it's big food, which is the food industry, or big pharma, which is the drug industry, or big healthcare, which you could define as the hospital systems and the insurance systems. We have to be careful for the influence of those in our thinking. And it may not be that people intentionally want to harm someone else, but those influences are very pernicious, and we need to examine them much closer. For example, the American Heart Association they have a heart check box that they license to people, and they license it to sugar cereals as a heart healthy food, and they've received millions of dollars for that. And that's misleading, because people then feed those to their children thinking they're safe and it's good for their heart, when actually they're really not. They're really bad.
So that was shocking for me to find out that those heart healthy food, those checks, or diabetic food, those checks are actually just basically symbols or signs that you can purchase, you can buy, that the food industry actually pays money to be able to put them on their packaged foods. That was shocking for me. I truly believed in the heart healthy foods. We have those in the UK as well, and approved by the Diabetes UK, for example, which is our equivalent of your ADA. I believed in those.
Yeah, and what you're saying, I think you've raised a really important challenge that we have in advancing an agenda of lifestyle change and taking control of our health through eating foods and exercise and this sort of thing. The problem with it is that there's not necessarily a lot of money to be made from it. So if we're up against, let's say, type 2 diabetics, they can either stop eating carbohydrates, and for most of the patients, the diabetes will go away. If you're on a carnivore diet, for most people, there's very good studies now that will go away. Or you can be prescribed insulin. Insulin will pay, and other drugs, but eventually leading up to insulin for type 2 diabetics now. And there's an industry about supplying insulin, and our healthcare system is set up about that. And even to get darker, there's a downstream industry. The people on insulin, as you mentioned, get complications of diabetes. They have a higher rate of amputations. The number one cause of amputation is diabetics. 80% of diabetics die of heart attacks. Blindness, number one cause is diabetes. So there's the whole industry has downstream benefits. And I'm not saying this is some grand plan that, the deep state is organizing or anything, but it's something that we have to be aware of, that there's a lot of money to be made with certain approaches, and other approaches which may be as simple as just skip breakfast and don't eat processed foods. Actually, it's harder to make money that way. So there's less advertising money put into it, less dollars put into it. So it's an upstream challenge to make that argument for people and make them even aware of it over the noise of all the other ads that we're seeing.
Yeah, but when I talk to my group of people, sometimes in group sessions, I tell them, let's not blame the pharmaceutical companies or even the sugar manufacturing companies, because at the end, let's look at them as businesses. They are businesses. They're not interested in your health. They are businesses. They want to make profits. Once you change your outlook and look at them as pure businesses that have nothing to do with your health, then I think you understand what's happening around you. Everything becomes much clearer. So again, I think part of the sort of corrupted research that we have, especially about sugar, is you've actually these papers are still out there, papers proving that sugar, and we're talking about the sucrose, like the white fructose glucose sugar, it can be part of a very healthy diet. And when you look deeper, these papers actually are funded by the sugar industry. So of course, they are not going to put out research papers saying, hey, avoid our products.
Yeah. And as you probably talked about with your guests, and we go over this in the book, that in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, there was a kind of a decision point in American nutrition. There was the McGovern hearings and sort of a national health policy, whether to eat high sugar or high fat diets, or low sugar, low carb, and low fat diets. And arguments were put in on both sides. And eventually we all know who won. It was the low fat diets that my mom and all the dietitian community and the medical community followed for the next 70 years. And, we're arguably we're paying the price for it right now. But in 2016, there was a group from UC San Francisco that Rob Lustig often mentions. I'm not sure if he was a co-author on the paper, but they did some research and they found out that back when these decisions were being made, there was a huge amount of money paid to the then chairman of the Harvard Medical School nutrition department to write articles saying how great sugar was for you and how healthy sugar was and how bad fat was. And it shows the influence of that industry, at least in that particular case. But I'm sure, it's happening in other areas, and it happens. I'm sure there's a fat industry people that are doing the same thing, but the point is we have to be especially careful about these outside influences.
Mm-hmm. So we mentioned some of the existing lies. So what would you advise that people do if they are eating the SAD diet, very sort of appropriately called the SAD diet, that stands for Standard American Diet, processed foods and ready-made foods. We call them ready-made foods, microwavable, stick in the microwave for 5 minutes, it's done. So if people are eating the SAD diet, what are some of the changes they can make to improve their health?
Yeah, I have to say, as a particular diet, I'm sort of agnostic. I mentioned I was a vegan for many years. I've been a carnivore for a while now, and I really don't have any dog in the race or whatever. I'm happy eating whatever is healthy. If the science comes out tomorrow that drinking Coca-Cola is healthy and that's all you eat, I will drink Coca-Cola. It's like, and I love Coca-Cola. I mean, I used to drink a lot of it, but and then to follow that up, I also believe that it's possible to eat a healthy diet and achieve this metabolic wellness that we've been talking about, and increase longevity, decrease chronic disease. I personally believe it's possible with any diet ranging from a totally plant-based vegan diet all the way to a carnivore total meat-based thing where you don't even eat plants because you don't want the plant toxins, So I believe if you're careful, you can do it with anywhere in between then, and there's no judgment on vegans or carnivores. I count them in my friends in both ways, and I've been both myself. But I think it's a quadrant. So you have, if you imagine a quadrant, so there's health up here and unhealthy down here, and there's vegan on this side and carnivore on this side. So you can be a healthy vegan, or you can be an unhealthy vegan. You can be a healthy carnivore, you can be an unhealthy carnivore, or you can be a healthy, sad person, the standard American diet, but you just got to cut out a lot of the standard American diet, which then it's no longer a standard American diet. So for me, back to your original question, is the things that I would cut out are largely processed foods to begin with. And processed foods means, on the carbohydrate side, it's processed carbohydrates. So it's sugars, which, fructose, glucose. If I'm going to eat fructose, it's going to be in a fruit, and it's not going to be ground up, smoothied, or anything else. Way to make an apple unhealthy is to put it in a blender, So any fruit I'll eat that way. I don't eat a lot of fruit, but that way. So lower fructose, lower glucose, refined carbohydrates, rice, flour, starch, all those things I consider to be problematic, and they're the main components of processed foods, really. So those are the processed carbohydrates. The processed fats, in my opinion, the problems are the industrial oils, the so-called vegetable oils. Of course, they don't have any vegetables in them. That was a branding name. The seed oils, canola oil, and all the other ones there. I avoid those. Mm-hmm. Corn oil, absolutely. And instead eat saturated fats, healthy fats, avocados, and healthy polyunsaturated fats, even also, but just avoiding the seed oils really with that. As far as the protein, I don't really change my protein that much. If I was a vegan person, I would get, my protein from animal sources, of course. And if I was a carnivore, I would get it from animal sources as much. Yeah. And then the only other thing I would throw in there is the grains, just because of the gluten issue, and then grains in general as contributing to leaky gut and being pro-inflammatory, just to be safe. So going from a sad diet to a healthy diet would be to largely remove processed foods. So that means, cutting back the fast food chains. When you go to a restaurant, be careful, because you can't control what's in the food. Restaurant dining, I love restaurants, I love restaurant food, but it's really bad for you. I mean, it's, even if you try and watch what you eat, you can do that to order certain things on the menu, but you have to be careful. Then when you go to the store, and you've probably talked to your audience about this too, but I still do it myself. My wife will bring home some hummus, and I'll look at it, and it's great. It's hummus, but it's the number 2 ingredient is canola oil or something, some sort of processed seed oil. So I looked very closely at food labels, and ideally in a perfect world, you'd eat food that wouldn't have labels at all. And then you're pretty safe, fresh, unprocessed food. But if I have to eat something with a label, I scrutinize it very closely. I try to have 1 gram or less of sugar per serving if I can in it. No added sugar if I can. No canola oil, no seed oils added to it if I can that way as well. So those are what my recommendations would be.
Great set of recommendations, and they're identical to what Dr. Philip Ovadia, the cardiothoracic surgeon, said on this very channel. He said exactly the same, but I don't care what diet you're following, but he did give a caution about the vegan diet. So, you have to sort of realize that you may be deficient in certain nutrients, but as long as you're supplementing, you'll be fine. So I don't care what diet you're eating, just don't eat the processed junk. And so same advice as you gave. But just a funny anecdote about, studying food labels. It's, my audience knows I moved. When I lived in the UK, I knew all the brands. I was familiar because I'd studied everything. So I would just put my hand and I knew I could trust that. So I knew what to get. Coming to Mexico here, all the brands are new to me. So I'm reading them in Spanish as well. So I made a mistake buying yogurt because on the front it said natural yogurt, no added sugar. So I thought, oh, finally, because I was struggling finding real yogurt that wasn't vanilla flavored or blueberry flavored or, with added sugars. And I brought this natural yogurt home, 1 spoonful, and it tastes sweet. So then I looked at the full ingredients list, and it has maltodextrin and every sweetener in the world that you can think of was in there. But on the front it said no added sugars, natural yogurt. So you have to be careful. You have to read the labels and look at the back and look at the full ingredients list.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
I've taken enough of your time, Dr. Lufkin. I know you're a busy man. So before we wrap this up, how can people find you? If they want to support you online,
Sure.
Where can they find you?
My website is robertlufkinmd.com. My Twitter handle is the same, at robertlufkinmd.com. This is the book that's coming out soon, and we don't have pre-orders yet, but pre-orders will be out in another month or 2. But if you want, you can go on the website and put your name in, and we'll email you if you want to be notified when pre-orders are available. And then the book itself will be delivered in the fall this year also.
Excellent. And I'm very excited. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to the book. Thank you so much for your time today. There is so much to talk. There was so much else I could have discussed with you. We're run out of time. Hopefully we can do this again.
Yes, thank you so much, Nayiri. I love your podcast. I'm looking forward to hearing more of them. And thank you so much for the great work you're doing in this space.
Thank you. Have a good day, Dr. Lufkin.
Thanks, you too.